What is a woman worth when she cannot give her husband a child? In the hardscrabble Arizona territory of 1878, the answer was less than nothing. For Saraphina Hayes, the pronouncement of her barrenness was a death sentence delivered by her own father. He sold her like cattle to a monstrous man who wanted a servant for his bed and his home. But as she stood on a dusty street, her soul stripped bare for all to see, an unexpected shadow fell across her path. He was a man caught between two worlds, an Apache warrior with eyes that held a sorrow as deep as her own, and he made an offer that would change the very course of the desert winds. This is the story of how a woman discarded as worthless found her strength in the arms of a man the world had forgotten. The silence in the Hayes homestead was a heavy, smothering blanket. It was a silence born not of peace, but of profound disappointment, and it had a name, Saraphina. For 5 years she had been married to Sterling Croft, the son of a neighboring rancher, a union her father, Bartholomew Hayes, had engineered with the precision of a master strategist. It was supposed to cement their family's standing, to merge two prosperous bloodlines into a small dynasty. But the union had produced nothing. No sons to inherit the land, no daughters to marry off for further gain. Just 5 years of quiet shame and Sterling's increasingly cold shoulder. It was Sterling who had made the final public declaration. After taking a new wife, a fertile girl of 17, who was already showing he had stood in the center of redemption, Gulch's only saloon, and announced that Saraphina was a dry well, a field of salt. The humiliation had been absolute. Her father had brought her back to his house, not out of love, but to contain the disgrace. Now at 24, Saraphina felt ancient. Her days were spent in the suffocating quiet of the house, under the constant accusatory gaze of her father. Bartholomew was a man carved from the unforgiving landscape itself, all harsh angles and unyielding principles. To him everything had a purpose, a value. A horse that couldn't be ridden was glue. A cow that gave no milk was meat. A daughter who couldn't produce an heir was a liability, a drain on his resources. "He is coming this afternoon," Bartholomew stated, not looking at her. He was polishing a silver buckle, his movements methodical and severe. The he was left unspoken, a spectre that had haunted their meager conversations for a week. Seraphina's hands, raw from lye soap, stilled over the dough she was kneading. Father, her mother Agnes, flinched from her seat by the hearth, her knitting needles clicking like nervous insects. Agnes lived in a state of perpetual fear, a pale reflection of her husband's iron will. She offered no comfort, only worried glances that scurried away the moment they were met. "Corcoran Holt, Bartholomew," said finally, looking up. His eyes were the color of faded denim and just as hard. "He's a man of means, a widower. His property borders the southern pass. He requires a housekeeper, a woman to manage his affairs." The words were carefully chosen, but the meaning was as sharp and ugly as a shard of broken glass. Corcoran Holt was nearly 70, a corpulent, wheezing man whose first 2 wives had died under mysterious, whispered-about circumstances. He was known for his foul temper and fouler appetites. He didn't want a housekeeper. He wanted a possession. Saraphina felt the blood drain from her face. "You cannot be serious. To be his housekeeper, do not play the fool, girl," Bartholomew snapped, setting the buckle down with a sharp crack. "You are used goods. Damaged. No man of standing will have you. Your purpose as a wife has failed." Sterling made that clear to the entire territory. "Holt is offering a solution. He will take you off my hands. He is willing to compensate me for the trouble and expense of your upbringing." Compensate. The word hung in the air, vile and transactional. He was selling her. Her own father was selling her because her body had betrayed his ambitions. Mother Saraphina pleaded, turning to the woman by the fire. Agnes refused to meet her eyes. "Your father knows what is best, Saraphina. Mr. Holt is a respected man. You will be provided for." Provided for. Seraphina's voice trembled with a rage she hadn't felt in years. "I will be his slave, his chattel. You know the stories about him. Stories of gossips and children," Bartholomew thundered, rising to his full, imposing height. "The arrangement is made. Holt has been generous. He's providing 50 head of prime cattle and cancelling my debt at the general store. A fine price for a barren woman." The cruelty of it stole her breath. A fine price. She looked at the man who gave her life and saw only a merchant appraising his wares. She saw the years of trying to please him, of striving to be the perfect daughter, all of it dissolving into a simple, cold calculation of profit and loss. She was a loss. Tears welled hot and useless. "I will not go." Bartholomew crossed the room in 2 strides. He didn't strike her. His control was too absolute for such messy displays. Instead, he gripped her chin, forcing her head up. His voice was a low, menacing hiss. "You will. You will go with him, and you will be gracious. You will do your duty as he sees fit. You are a Hayes, and you will not bring further shame upon this house by acting like a hysterical filly. Is that understood?" His grip was like iron. His eyes held no pity, no fatherly affection. They were the eyes of a stranger sealing a deal. She could see her own terrified reflection in them. Defeated, she gave a single jerky nod. He released her, and she stumbled back against the table. The dough she had been kneading, a symbol of the domestic life she was supposed to build, now seemed like a formless, pale mockery. Later that afternoon, a lavish carriage, entirely out of place amidst the mud and grit of their ranch, rolled to a stop outside. Corcoran Holt heaved himself out. He was even more repulsive up close. His face was a jumble of fleshy folds with small, greedy eyes that roamed over Seraphina's form as if she were a side of beef he was considering for purchase. He smelled of stale sweat and expensive, cloying cologne. He and her father spoke in low tones on the porch, their words a death knell for her future. She saw a pouch of coins exchange hands, sealing the finality of it. Holt grinned, revealing a row of yellowed teeth. "The girl looks healthy enough," he wheezed, his gaze lingering on her chest. "She'll do." Bartholomew gestured for her to come forward. "Seraphina, Mr. Holt is ready to escort you to your new home." Her new home. A cage. She picked up the small bundle containing her few belongings, 2 dresses, a brush, and a worn copy of a book her grandmother had given her. She walked past her mother, who sat as still as a stone statue, her face a mask of miserable obedience. No goodbye was offered. No touch of the hand. As Seraphina stepped onto the porch, into the harsh glare of the afternoon sun, she felt a profound and terrifying emptiness. She was utterly alone, an object sold and delivered. As Holt's meaty hand closed around her arm to lead her to the carriage, she looked out past the borders of her father's land toward the distant hazy mesas. It was Apache land, a place of wildness and freedom she could never know. And in that moment, she would have given anything to simply run to be swallowed by that wilderness and disappear forever. But Holt's grip was tight, a promise of the prison that awaited her. The journey to town was a silent torment. Seraphina sat pressed against the far side of the carriage, the velvet squabs feeling like a mockery of comfort. Holt filled the space, his bulk crowding her, his wheezing breath a constant repulsive rhythm in the enclosed air. He made no attempt at conversation, for which she was grateful, but his eyes were rarely off her. They were possessive, appraising, making her skin crawl. He was like a man who had just purchased a fine piece of furniture and was admiring its lines before putting it to use. They were not heading to his ranch, as she'd expected. Instead, the carriage pulled up directly in front of the Redemption Gulch Saloon, the very epicenter of her public humiliation. It was the middle of the day, and men loitered on the boardwalk, spitting tobacco and nursing lukewarm beers. Every head turned as the opulent carriage, a rare sight, came to a stop. A small matter of business to conclude, Holt grunted, climbing out, and then turning to pull her after him. His grip on her arm was bruising. A public transaction requires a public seal. Panic seized her. He was parading her. He was making a spectacle of his acquisition. He dragged her onto the boardwalk, positioning her beside him like a trophy. Men stopped talking. The blacksmith, Mr. Abernathy, paused with his hammer in mid-air. Even the town's perpetually drunk Dr. Henderson seemed to sober slightly, his bleary eyes focusing on the scene. Bartholomew Hayes was already there, standing beside the town's land registrar, a weaselly man named Peterson. Her father wouldn't even look at her. His focus was on the piece of paper Peterson held. As agreed, Bartholomew Holt boomed, his voice oozing satisfaction. 50 head of cattle the debt at Miller's Mercantile cleared, and this bonus. He produced the same pouch of coins he'd given her father earlier. A sign of goodwill. All in exchange for the wardship and domestic service of your daughter, Saraphina Hayes. The words were a legalistic veneer over a crude and ugly truth. Wardship. Domestic service. He was buying her, and he was making sure the whole town knew it. Knew that she was so worthless, so broken, that her own family had sold her off for livestock and credit. The shame was a physical force, pressing the air from her lungs. She stared at the dusty planks of the boardwalk, wishing they would open up and swallow her whole. A figure detached itself from the deep shadows of the alleyway between the saloon and the general store. He moved with a fluid grace that was utterly alien to the clumsy, shuffling gaits of the townsfolk. He was tall and lean, his body honed by a life she could barely imagine. His black hair was long held back by a simple leather band. He wore buckskin trousers and a plain cotton shirt, the attire of a man who straddled two worlds. His face was striking with high cheekbones and a strong jaw, but it was his eyes that held her. They were dark and intelligent, and they held an expression of profound, weary sorrow. He was Apache. In Redemption, Gulch, the Apache were a source of fear and suspicion. They were tolerated for trade, but never trusted. This man, however, carried himself with an authority that defied their prejudice. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze, not on Holt or her father, but directly on her. He saw her. Not as a commodity, not as a barren woman, but as a person trapped in a nightmare. "This is not right," he said. His voice was quiet, yet it cut through the murmuring of the crowd like a razor. It was low and resonant, with only a trace of an accent. Holt turned his face, purpling with rage. "This is a private matter, Savage. It's no concern of yours. Get back to whatever hole you crawled out of." The Apache man didn't flinch. His gaze remained steady. He looked from Holt's sneering face to Bartholomew's stony one. "You sell your own blood?" He asked, the question simple and devastating. Bartholomew's jaw tightened. "She is my daughter to do with as I see fit. The law is on my side." He gestured to Peterson, who nervously brandished the contract. "Some laws are a sickness on the land," the warrior replied calmly. He took a step forward. "What is your price for her?" A wave of shocked silence fell over the crowd. Holt let out a bark of incredulous laughter. "My price? She's not for sale, not to the likes of you. She's mine. The deal is done. The paper is not signed." The warrior observed his eyes, flicking to the document in Peterson's trembling hand. He then turned his gaze back to Bartholomew. "Your price was 50 cattle and a cleared debt." Bartholomew's eyes narrowed. "What's it to you?" The warrior didn't answer him directly. He looked again at Saraphina, a flicker of something unreadable, pity perhaps, or recognition in his dark eyes. Then he looked back at her father. "I offer a better price. 100 of my finest horses. Not the half-wild ponies you see in town. Strong, fast, bred for endurance. More than you would see in 10 years of ranching. They are mine to give." The crowd gasped. 100 horses was a fortune. It was a kingly bride price, something out of a storybook, and it was being offered for a barren woman by an Apache. The absurdity of it was staggering. Bartholomew was visibly shaken. Greed warred with prejudice on his face. 100 horses. That was wealth beyond his dreams. It could make him the most powerful rancher in the region. "You don't have 100 horses," Holt spat, his voice thick with venom. "You're a lying heathen savage. They are in the canyons to the west." The warrior said, his voice even. "I give my word. The Apache do not break their word on a trade of honor." He held Holt's gaze. "This is not a trade of honor. This is filth. But I will pay to clean it." The insult was plain. Holt's face contorted in a mask of fury. "She is mine. We have an agreement." "You have a piece of paper," the warrior countered. He turned his full attention to Bartholomew, ignoring Holt completely. 100 horses. For your daughter's freedom. She will come with me. She will be under my protection. She will be my wife. My wife. The words struck Saraphina with the force of a physical blow, to be sold by one man only to be purchased by another. But as she looked at the Apache warrior, at his quiet dignity, at the strange sadness in his eyes that seemed to mirror her own, a desperate, impossible flicker of hope ignited within her. Anything was better than Corcoran Holt. A life in a hidden canyon was better than a life in his suffocating mansion. A life with this silent, sorrowful stranger was better than a life with that leering monster. Bartholomew Hayes, a man ruled by avarice, made his decision. The value of 100 prime horses vastly outweighed 50 cattle and a mercantile debt. It also outweighed any paternal duty or social convention. "The deal with Mr. Holt is void," he declared, his voice tight. He looked at the Apache. "You bring the horses to the edge of my land by the full moon. The girl is yours." No Holt roared, lunging forward, but the town sheriff, a paunchy man named Gable, finally decided to intervene, stepping between him and the warrior. The Apache man nodded once to her father. Then he turned to Saraphina. He did not grab her arm as Holt had. He simply stood before her and held out his hand. It was a strong hand, calloused and capable, an offer, not a demand. After a moment of heart-stopping hesitation, staring at the hand that represented a leap into an unknown, even more terrifying than the one she'd just faced. Saraphina lifted her own trembling hand and placed it in his. His grip was firm and surprisingly gentle. Without a word, he turned and led her away from the crowd, away from her stunned father and the apoplectic Corcoran Holt. He led her past the staring faces of the townsfolk, toward the edge of town where 2 horses were tied, and into a future she could not possibly imagine. The silence that accompanied their journey was vastly different from the oppressive quiet of her father's house. It was a living silence, filled with the whisper of the wind through sagebrush, the cry of a distant hawk, and the steady rhythmic beat of their horses' hooves against the dry earth. The warrior, who had not yet told her his name, rode with an effortless posture, his body moving in perfect sync with his horse. He had given her the gentler of the 2 mounts, a sturdy mare with a calm temperament. Saraphina was suspended in a state of shock adrift between a past that had cast her out and a future that was a terrifying blank. She was the wife of an Apache warrior. The thought was so outlandish, so contrary to every story and prejudice she had ever been taught, that her mind could scarcely grasp it. She kept glancing at the man's back, at the way his long hair was tied, the powerful muscles of his shoulders beneath his simple shirt. He was an enigma, a savior and a captor all in one. He led them away from the main trails, following paths that were invisible to her eyes. They moved through narrow arroyos, up rocky inclines and across mesas that offered breathtaking views of the sprawling, sun-baked territory. The landscape was brutal and beautiful, a palette of reds, ochres, and deep purples under an impossibly vast blue sky. It was a world away from the dusty, circumscribed confines of Redemption Gulch. As dusk began to bleed across the horizon, they arrived at a place that defied all her expectations. Tucked into a small sheltered valley, fed by a spring that nourished a grove of cottonwood trees, was not a collection of hide lodges, as she had imagined, but a single solid cabin. It was built of stone and timber, with a well-made roof and a sturdy door. A small, neatly tended garden grew to one side, and a simple corral held 3 more horses who whinnied a soft welcome. The warrior dismounted and came to her side, offering his hand to help her down. His touch was brief and impersonal, yet it sent a strange tremor through her. For the first time, he spoke to her directly. "This is my home," he said. "You are safe here." His name, he told her, was Kyle, just Kyle. The inside of the cabin was clean and spare. A stone hearth dominated one wall with a small stack of firewood neatly piled beside it. A sturdy table and 2 chairs stood in the center. A bed covered with thick furs was tucked into a corner. On a set of shelves were a few clay pots, some woven baskets, and a small, surprising collection of books with worn leather bindings. The place spoke of a solitary, orderly existence. Saraphina stood awkwardly by the door, clutching her small bundle. She didn't know the rules here. What was expected of her? Was she a wife in name only, or was she to perform the duties of one? The fear that had been held at bay by the shock of her rescue now returned with a vengeance. Kyle seemed to sense her turmoil. He didn't approach her instead, moving to the hearth to build a fire. "You are hungry," he stated more than asked. He worked with an economy of motion, preparing a simple meal of dried meat beans and corn cakes cooked on a flat stone by the fire. He set a plate before her at the table, and then sat opposite, eating his own meal in silence. The silence was excruciating for Saraphina. She was used to filling silences with nervous chatter or absorbing the angry quiet of her father. This was different. It wasn't an angry silence, but it was deep and unreadable. She ate, forcing the food down, a throat tight with anxiety. Why, she finally managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. "Why did you do that? Pay such a price?" Kyle finished his mouthful before answering, his dark eyes fixed on the fire. "I have seen men sell cattle and horses. I have never seen a man sell his child. It is a thing without honor. But to make me your wife, a white woman, a stranger." He finally looked at her, and the deep well of sadness she had first seen in his eyes was there again, more potent in the flickering firelight. "My wife," he said softly, "died 3 winters ago. The coughing sickness took her. My son followed a week later. The confession was so stark, so filled with pain, that it silenced her completely. The cabin, which had felt empty now, felt filled with ghosts. She understood now. The loneliness he carried was a burden as heavy as her own shame. He wasn't just rescuing her. He was filling a void in his own life. They were 2 solitary souls, thrown together by a cruel twist of fate. "I am sorry," she said, the words inadequate. He gave a slight accepting nod. He cleared their plates and then gestured toward the bed. "You should rest. You will take the bed. And you, I will be by the fire." He laid out a bedroll on the floor, making it clear the matter was not up for discussion. There was a clear, unspoken boundary. He had bought her, claimed her as his wife, but he was not demanding anything of her. He was offering her sanctuary, nothing more. That night, Saraphina lay in the surprisingly comfortable bed, the scent of wood smoke and clean furs surrounding her. She listened to the sound of Kyle's steady breathing from across the room. She had been sold, shamed and disowned. She had been bought, claimed, and brought to the home of a man whose people her own people feared and hated. And yet, for the first time in years, she didn't feel like a possession. She felt safe. The silence of the cabin was no longer awkward or frightening. It was a shared silence, a quiet space where two wounded people could begin to exist side by side without judgment. Sleep, which had been a stranger for so long, finally found her in the heart of that deep desert quiet. The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm, a life dictated by the sun and the seasons, rather than the judgments of men. Saraphina learned that Kyle was a man of profound self-sufficiency. He hunted with a skill that left her in awe, tanned his own hides, and tended his garden with a gentle patience. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He showed her which plants in the valley were for eating and which were for medicine. He taught her how to track the stars across the vast, ink-black sky. He never forced her to do anything, but she found herself wanting to contribute. She took over the cooking, learning to use the ingredients he provided. She mended his clothes, her needlework, a small, familiar comfort in this strange new life. She kept the cabin clean and tidy, finding a sense of purpose in these simple domestic tasks that had once felt like a prison in her father's house. Here they were not duties demanded of her, but offerings freely given. Their conversations were sparse, but slowly a fragile bridge of understanding began to form between them. She learned that he was not an outcast from his people, but chose to live apart. His father had been a chief, but Kyle had grown weary of the constant conflict the treaties made and broken by the white men. After his wife and son died, the noise of the camp had become unbearable, a constant reminder of his loss. He preferred the solitude of his hidden valley. Their tentative peace, however, could not remain isolated from the world forever. Once a month, Kyle would ride to Redemption Gulch to trade pelts and medicinal herbs for things he couldn't make himself flour salt coffee. The first time he prepared to go after her arrival, he asked if she wanted to come. The thought of facing the town, of seeing the sneering faces, and hearing the whispers filled her with dread. "I will stay," she said quietly. He simply nodded, his expression unreadable. When he returned late that evening, he was more silent than usual. As he unpacked his supplies, he placed a small, cloth-wrapped object on the table in front of her. It was a new bar of lavender-scented soap and a bolt of deep blue calico fabric. It was a gift, a simple, thoughtful luxury she hadn't known in years. "Thank you," she whispered, her throat thick with emotion. "The town talks," he said, his back to her, as he stored the flour. "Holt has put a price on my head, a bounty. He tells everyone I stole you. Saraphina's blood ran cold. Stole me. The entire town witnessed the bargain. The law in that town is whatever the richest man says it is." Kyle replied, his voice flat. "Sheriff Gable does what Holt pays him to do. Holt's pride is wounded. It is a dangerous thing in a weak man." The sanctuary of their valley suddenly felt fragile, vulnerable. The outside world with its greed and prejudice was pressing in. The threat was not only from the white world. One afternoon, while Saraphina was gathering herbs by the spring, 2 Apache women appeared at the edge of the cottonwood grove. They were older, their faces lined with the wisdom of years. They watched her with hard, assessing eyes. She knew they were from Kyle's tribe, their camp a half-day's ride away. One of them, a woman named Sonze, spoke to her in heavily accented English. "You are the white woman he paid a chief's price for." It was not a question. Saraphina straightened her heart, pounding. "I am." "He grieved too long for his family," the other woman said, her voice sharp. "To bring one of them here to replace his wife. It is an insult to her memory." The words were a slap. Here too she was an outsider, an unwelcome presence. "I did not ask for this," Saraphina said, her voice shaking slightly. "And I do not seek to replace anyone." Sonzi stepped closer, her gaze sweeping over Saraphina, taking in her plain dress, her calloused hands. She saw not the pampered daughter of a rancher, but a woman who worked. Kyle walks a lonely path. He has a good heart, but it is a broken one. If you break it further, the spirits will not forgive you. It was a warning, clear and absolute. They watched her for a few moments longer, before melting back into the landscape as silently as they had appeared. When Kyle returned from his hunting, she told him of the visit. He sighed, a rare display of weariness. "They are my mother's sisters. They worry. They do not understand. They think I am an insult to your first wife's memory," Saraphina said, unable to keep the hurt from her voice. Kyle stopped what he was doing and turned to face her fully. It was the first time he had truly looked at her, with an intensity that went beyond simple observation. "My wife was named Tala," he said, his voice soft. "She was brave and kind. My son was named Niol, like the wind. They are not memories to be insulted. They are a part of my spirit that is gone. You are not their replacement. You are something new, something I did not expect." The quiet honesty of his words touched a place deep inside her that she thought had died. He was not comparing her. He was not asking her to be anything other than herself. In that moment, the gap between them, the chasm of their different worlds, seemed to shrink. That night, as a storm rolled in, rattling the cabin with thunder and wind, a sudden violent crash from the corral sent them both rushing outside. In the flashes of lightning, they saw the source of the commotion. One of the corral fences had been smashed, and a large mountain lion was attacking one of the horses. Without a second's hesitation, Kyle grabbed his rifle. But in the teeming rain and chaotic darkness, a clean shot was impossible. The horse screamed a sound of pure terror. Acting on pure instinct, Saraphina grabbed a burning brand from the hearth, ignoring the searing heat, and ran toward the fight, screaming and waving the flame. The cougar, startled by the fire and the sudden shrieking assault, released the horse and snarled at her. For a heart-stopping second, the beast crouched ready to spring. Just then, Kyle found his shot. The crack of the rifle echoed the thunder, and the great cat fell. Shaking and soaked to the bone, Saraphina stood over the wounded, trembling horse. Kyle rushed to her side, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and admiration. He looked from her to the dead cougar and back again. "That was the bravest, most foolish thing I have ever seen," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "It was your horse," she replied, her own voice trembling. He reached out his hand, gently touching her cheek, his thumb brushing away a drop of rain. It was the first time he had touched her with anything resembling tenderness. The barrier between them, already weakened, crumbled into dust. In the heart of the storm, under the watchful eyes of the dark mesas, They both realized that the whispers on the wind, the threats from the outside world, no longer mattered as much as the quiet, fierce bond that had grown between them in the shelter of the valley. In the weeks following the mountain lion attack, the shift between them was palpable. The formal distance Kyle had maintained was gone, replaced by a quiet intimacy that wove itself into the fabric of their daily lives. A shared glance across the fire, a light touch of hands as they worked in the garden, these small moments became a language of their own. The line he had drawn on the cabin floor with his bedroll by the fire and hers in the bed eventually vanished. One night, after a long day, spent salving the horse's wounds and repairing the corral, he simply came to the bed and lay beside her. It was a silent question, and her silent acceptance was the answer. Their union was not one of youthful, passionate abandon. It was a slow, gentle coming together of two people who had known profound loss and loneliness. It was a rediscovery of solace, a quiet affirmation of life in the face of so much sorrow. For Saraphina, it was a revelation. With Sterling, intimacy had been a duty, a cold and clinical act aimed at procreation. With Cale, it was a shared comfort, a warmth that seeped into the broken parts of her soul and made her feel whole. It was the spring, and the valley was bursting with life. The cottonwoods grew new leaves of a vibrant, impossible green, and the desert floor was carpeted with the fleeting beauty of wildflowers. Saraphina, too, felt a change within herself. At first, she dismissed it. A queasiness in the morning, a weariness in her bones that was deeper than usual. She attributed it to the richer food, the hard work, the changing seasons. The diagnosis of her barrenness was so deeply ingrained in her identity that the alternative was simply unthinkable. But the signs persisted. One morning, the smell of the coffee Kyle was brewing a scent she usually loved sent her rushing outside, her stomach heaving. He followed her, a look of concern on his face. "Are you unwell?" he asked, placing a steadying hand on her back. "It is nothing," she gasped, wiping her mouth. "Something I ate, perhaps." But Kyle's eyes, so attuned to the rhythms of nature, saw what she refused to see. He looked at her, a strange new light dawning in his expression. He said nothing, but a few days later he brought her a tea brewed from a specific type of leaf. It was a woman's tea, he told her, one his mother had given his wife. It settled her stomach. The truth finally dawned on Saraphina one afternoon as she was mending one of Kyle's shirts. Her monthly courses, which had been a punctual reminder of her failure for so many years, were late. Not just by a few days, but by more than 2 months. Her hands stilled the needle dropping from her fingers. It couldn't be. It was impossible. A cruel trick of her body, a phantom hope designed to torment her. Yet as she placed a trembling hand on her lower abdomen, she felt a profound and undeniable certainty. A new life was taking root within her. The dry well, the field of salt, it had all been a lie. Whether the doctor in Redemption Gulch had been incompetent, or whether the problem had never been with her at all but with Sterling, she didn't know. The reason no longer mattered. The impossible had happened. She was with child. Tears began to stream down her face. They were not tears of sorrow or shame, but of a joy so fierce and overwhelming it was painful. Every cruel word, every look of disappointment from her father, every moment of humiliation was washed away in that flood of vindication. She wasn't broken. She wasn't worthless. When Kyle returned from checking his snares, he found her sitting at the table, weeping silently. He was at her side in an instant, his hands on her shoulders. "Saraphina, what is wrong? Are you hurt?" She looked up at him, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes shining with a light he had never seen before. "Nothing is wrong, Cale," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Everything is right." She took his hand, his strong, calloused hand that had saved her, and placed it on her belly. We are... She couldn't finish the sentence, so choked was she with joy. He stood frozen for a moment, his hand resting on her. His face, usually so composed, was a canvas of disbelief, then dawning comprehension, and then a wave of emotion so powerful it seemed to shake his entire being. The deep sadness in his eyes was replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated wonder. He knelt before her, his other hand coming to rest beside the first, as if he could feel the miracle through her simple dress. Naol, he breathed the name of his lost son, a ghostly whisper. Then he shook his head, clearing the past to make way for the future. He looked into her eyes, and she saw tears glistening in his own. "A child," he said, his voice cracking. "Our child." The curse that had defined her life had been broken. The shame that had been her constant companion had vanished. In this hidden valley with this man, the world called a savage, she had found not only sanctuary and love, but the one thing she had been told she could never have the hope of a family. But as they held each other wrapped in the profound joy of their secret, neither of them considered that such a miracle, such a powerful refutation of the lies told in Redemption, Gulch could not remain a secret for long. Like a seed, hope had been planted, but like thunder, the news of its growth was destined to echo beyond their peaceful valley, reaching the ears of a man who would see it not as a blessing, but as the deepest and most unforgivable of insults. News in the territory traveled on the wind, carried by trappers, prospectors, and traders. A whisper in a saloon in one town became a rumor in a general store 100 miles away by the next week. The news of Saraphina's condition first came to light when Sonse Kael's aunt made another visit to the valley. This time, her eyes were not hard with suspicion, but soft with a woman's knowing wisdom. She saw the change in Saraphina's body, the new protective way Kael watched over her. She left not with a warning, but with a gift of soft, tanned deer hide for a baby's wrapping. Sonzi spoke of the news with pride to her people, and from the Apache camp, the story trickled out. An Apache trader visiting Redemption Gulch for supplies mentioned it to the mercantile owner Miller while haggling over the price of sugar. The barren white woman, the one the Apache Kael had bought for a fortune in horses, was swelling with his child. Miller, a notorious gossip, wasted no time in spreading the tale. Within a day, it was the only topic of conversation in the saloon on the boardwalk and over every dinner table in town. For most, it was a source of shocking amusement, a bizarre story to liven up their dreary lives. But for one man, the news was not amusing. It was an intolerable affront. Corcoran Holt heard it from Sheriff Gable, who delivered the information with a sycophantic smirk, hoping to curry favor. Holt had been nursing his wounded pride for months, the public humiliation of being outbid by an Apache, a festering sore on his ego. He had placed the bounty on Kael, but no one had been foolish enough to venture into the canyons to try and collect it. He had assumed the woman would waste away out there or run off, proving him the wiser man in the end. But this was something else entirely. It was a direct, personal assault. The woman he had bought the Baron cast off was fertile after all, and she was carrying the child of the very man who had shamed him. It meant that everyone in town knew that Sterling Croft or Seraphina's own father, or Holt himself, was less of a man than an Apache warrior. It made him a laughingstock. His face turned a dangerous shade of mottled purple as Gable relayed the story. He swept a decanter of whiskey from his desk, shattering it against the wall. A lie he roared spittle flying from his lips. A trick, she's barren, it's a savage's lie to mock me. But deep down he knew it was true. The pieces fit together in a galling, infuriating tapestry of his own debasement. His rage, which had been simmering for months, boiled over into a murderous obsession. She was his property. The child, therefore, was also his property, tainted as it was. He would reclaim what was his, and erase the insult from the face of the earth. Holt began to gather his own justice. He couldn't rely on the law, as even the pliable Sheriff Gable was wary of starting a full-blown war with the Apache over a domestic dispute. So Holt turned to men who operated outside the law. He sent riders out to the hard-scrabble camps in the hills, to the saloons in lawless border towns. He offered gold a fortune to any man willing to ride with him. His call was answered by a dozen of the territory's worst men. They were claim-jumpers, army deserters, and wanted men drawn by the promise of Holt's money and the chance for some violence. Leading them was a man named Finch, a cruel, hawk-nosed gunman with dead eyes and a reputation for enjoying his work. And for a final sadistic twist, Holt sought out one more man, Sterling Croft. Saraphina's first husband, Sterling's new young wife, had recently delivered a daughter, not the son he craved, and his pride was already smarting. The news that his barren ex-wife was carrying a child for an Apache was the ultimate emasculation. When Holt offered him a chance to reclaim his honor and put an end to the story for good, Sterling, his face a mask of bitter resentment, agreed. He would see her pay for the humiliation she had brought upon him. Back in the valley, Cale felt the change in the world around them. He was a man who could read the land, and the land was telling him something was wrong. A hunting party from his tribe passed by, with a warning Holt was gathering gunmen. They were asking questions, trying to find the location of his hidden valley. The peace was over. He came back to the cabin that evening, his face grim. He didn't have to say a word. Saraphina saw it in his eyes. "It is Holt," she said, her hand instinctively going to her swollen belly. "He is coming," Kyle confirmed. "He has hired killers. They will not stop until they have what they want." Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Saraphina's happiness. For months, she had lived in a dream, a protected world where the ugliness of her past couldn't reach her. Now it was not only at her door, but it threatened the life of her unborn child. But the Saraphina who faced this news was not the terrified, helpless girl who had stood on the boardwalk of Redemption Gulch. She had faced down a mountain lion. She had built a life from the ashes of her old one. She was carrying a new life, a symbol of her strength and resilience. She would not let it be taken from her. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice steady, belying the frantic beating of her heart. "You must go," Kyle said, his voice strained. "My people will take you. They will hide you in the Stronghold Mountains until this is over." "No," she said the word, sharp and absolute. She looked around the small cabin, their home. She looked at Kyle, the man who had shown her kindness when the world had shown her only cruelty. "I will not run. I will not leave you. This is our home. This is our child. We will face him together." Kyle looked at her, at the fierce determination in her eyes, and he saw not a liability to be protected, but a partner. He saw the same spirit that had charged a mountain lion with a burning stick. He knew she was right. To run would be to live in fear forever. Their only chance was to make their stand here, in the place they had made their own. The storm had gathered. The wind was rising, and the clouds were dark on the horizon. For the next 2 days they prepared. Kyle fortified the cabin, barring the windows and reinforcing the door. He checked his rifle and his ammunition. He showed Saraphina how to load his spare pistol, her hands surprisingly steady. They worked in a grim, focused silence, a shared purpose hardening their resolve. They would not be victims. They would be defenders of the small, precious world they had built together. The storm was coming, and they would be ready to meet it. The attack came in the brazen heat of the late afternoon. 13 riders led by a triumphant Corcoran Holt spilled into the tranquil valley. Beside him were the hawk-nosed gunman, Finch, and, to Seraphina's horror, her former husband, Sterling Croft. Cale Holt's voice boomed. "Send out my property. Do so, and I may let you live savage." Silence was their only reply. On Holt's signal, Finch and his men dismounted and advanced on the cabin, using the trees for cover. The valley erupted into a chaos of gunfire. Kyle, calm and efficient, moved between the windows, his shots precise warnings. Inside, Seraphina reloaded his spare rifle, her fear eclipsed by a protective rage. When a gunman rushed the door with a torch, Kyle took him down. As another followed, Kyle was busy reloading. Without hesitation, Seraphina raised the pistol she clutched, fired through a crack in the door, and struck the man in the leg, forcing him back. Kyle shot her a look of fierce pride before returning his focus to the fight. As dusk began to fall, an impatient Holt roared, "Burn them out! I want her alive, but I want him dead," seeing the men gather brush for torches. Kyle knew he had to break the siege. "A hunter does not wait for the wolves in his den," he told Seraphina, slipping out the back window and melting into the landscape. Left alone, Seraphina barred the doors, the silence outside suddenly terrifying. Then a scream from the darkness, followed by a single unexpected shot. Kyle was hunting them. He moved like a phantom through the shadows, using his knowledge of the terrain to pick the attackers off one by one. Panic erupted. Sterling, pale with terror, tried to flee on his horse, but the animal shied, throwing him to the ground. Only Corcoran Holt and Finch remained. As Finch raised his pistol toward the woods, Seraphina fired from the cabin window. Her shot went wide, but startled the gunman, giving Cale the single second he needed. His rifle cracked, and Finch fell without a sound. Now only Holt was left, a pathetic, wheezing figure on his horse, his hired army gone. Kyle emerged from the woods, his rifle held loosely. Seraphina exited the cabin and stood beside him, a united, unbreakable front. The sight of her strong and defiant, holding the child he had come to claim, finally shattered Holt's resolve. With a pathetic sob, he yanked his horse around and galloped away, a coward fleeing the consequences of his own hatred. Silence returned to the valley. Kyle pulled Seraphina into an embrace, his hand resting protectively on her belly. As the first rays of morning sun crested the mesas, bathing the valley in a soft, clean light, a new day dawned. It was a dawn they had fought for, and earned with blood and courage. The storm had passed, and in its wake, their small family remained rooted in the desert soil, as strong and resilient as the land itself. Their redemption had been found not in a town, but in each other. Seraphina and Cale's story wasn't just the end of a battle. It was the beginning of a new legacy. Their child was born in the peace of their valley, a bridge between two worlds, a symbol of a love that refused to be broken by prejudice or pride. They proved that a person's worth is not defined by their family, their past, or the bitter judgments of others, but by the strength of their heart and the courage to choose their own destiny. Their tale became a quiet legend in the canyons, a testament to the fact that even in the harshest of lands, hope can take root and blossom in the most unexpected ways. If their story of resilience and love moved you, please take a moment to hit that like button to let us know. Share this video with someone who loves a story of the human spirit's triumph and don't forget to subscribe for more tales from the untamed heart of the Old West. Thank you for listening.